Mrs. Clinton, the government of Iraq is said to be appealing to the United States for help in fighting the problem that it's got with Islamic insurgents. Should military help be given?
Not at this time, no. I agree with the White House's rejection and reluctance to do the kind of military activities that the Maliki government is requesting, namely fighter aircraft to provide close support for the Army and also to go after targets. That is not a role for the United States. There needs to be a number of steps that Maliki and his government must take to demonstrate that he's committed to an inclusive Iraq, something he has not done up to date. The Army, which has not been able to hold territory, has to have an injection of discipline and professionalism, something the United States has been trying to help with. And Maliki has to be willing to demonstrate unequivocally that he is a leader for all Iraqis, not for a sectarian slice of the country.
But the White House is saying that no option is ruled out.
That's what they should say, because part of what they're trying to do...
But you think they should rule some things out?
At this time, I said. At this time, yes, because the conditions precedent have not been accepted or set by Maliki. And I think what the White House is doing now is making it very clear to him what they would have to see, and not saying that they would necessarily provide the kind of support he's asking for, but the sort of support that the United States believes would be appropriate.
But it would be inappropriate to send in ground forces of any kind?
Yes, that is not going to happen.
Never, under any circumstances?
Well, I mean, I never say never, because one doesn't know. The world is so unpredictable, but certainly not in any foreseeable future that I'm aware.
When you look at what's happening in Iraq, do you feel guilty that you supported the invasion?
Well, as I say in my book, I made a mistake giving the Bush administration and the authority that I voted for. It was not used as I had expected it to be used, and the entire implementation strategy was flawed. So yes, I made a mistake, and I deeply regret the consequences.
Because that country wasn't broken before the invasion, was it?
It was broken. It was a broken country, even though it had a dictator who could, by force and brutality, hold it together. But remember, he'd also invaded Kuwait, and he had gassed the Kurds. He was no shining example of sovereignty and territorial integrity.
No one suggests he was a nice guy.
Well, he was worse than not a nice guy. But that is not the debate. The debate now is, it was done. The invasion occurred. He was deposed. The Iraqi people were given a chance to chart a different course. Some of them have done quite well, like the Kurds in the north have done extremely well. But the government that came in through the elections, which were deemed internationally acceptable, has not done what it needed to do to try to unify the country, bring Sunni and Shiite alike, bring the different factions within together. Compare
Iraq, where there was intervention, with Syria, where there was no intervention.
Just shows you how hard it is to make these choices, which is why I'm calling the book Hard Choices. Because I did advocate for limited but focused action in Syria to try to vet, train, and equip moderate opponents of Assad.
And you were overruled by the president.
I was overruled, in part because of the lessons from Iraq. It's hard to get a little bit pregnant, so to speak, in being involved in these countries' internal conflicts, but I did think there was a potential role. Now, of course, what I say in the book was a wicked problem has become even wickeder.
How much was that decision not to get involved in Syria influenced by the fact that the British Parliament held that surprising vote not to have any military intervention?
I'm sure that influenced it because that vote was some days prior to the president having to make a final decision. And it was there was a series of votes, as I recall what happened in the British Parliament. Yeah. And the individual votes were defeated, but if you had added up all the votes for everything that would have been a positive, you could have gotten to that, but for all kinds of reasons, and I don't pretend to understand the intricacies of British politics or British parliamentary procedure. It was a defeat for the idea that there should be intervention.
And that influenced the American decision not to intervene?
I believe it did. I was out of office by then, but it's my understanding that it certainly was taken into account.
Can we talk a little about Russia? You famously pressed the reset button. Are you embarrassed by that now, that gesture?
No, I thought it was a brilliant stroke, which in retrospect appears even more so, because look at what we accomplished. Between the Russian invasion of Georgia in August 2008, which of course torpedoed relations between the United States and Russia for good reason, we come into office, and for that period of time, the interregnum, if you will, Medvedev is president and Putin is prime minister, and there were jobs we wanted to get done. We wanted to get Russia on board with tough sanctions against Iran. We wanted to have a New START treaty to limit nuclear weapons. We wanted to get their help in transiting across their huge country to get things we needed into Afghanistan. We got all that done. Putin comes back. Look where we are now. He invaded another country. So yes, but while we had that moment, we seized it, we used it, and succeeded.
Do you think Putin's a dangerous man?
He can be. He can be. And
do you think he's a man who exploits weakness?
I think he acts out of his perceived weakness of Russia. You know, I believe his goal is to reassert Russian power. He'd be perfectly happy if the Soviet Union could be reconstituted, but he's enough of a realist to know that's not going to happen. But he wants to, insofar as possible, control former Soviet republics in Central Asia and intimidate those in Europe. And of course, like any person with a view that that's what power should be used for, if he sees weakness or if he sees disorder, because I think he was as affected by what he perceived as disorder in Ukraine than by weakness. He acted in large measure because of what was happening in Maidan Square. And of course, he's going to explore and push the boundaries as far as he can.
You made some very strong comments about Ukraine, but you would concede that Ukraine is in Russia's sphere of influence.
No, of course I would not.
You wouldn't?
There cannot be spheres of influence in today's world, particularly in post-World War II.
Not even in the case of Cuba and the United States?
No, well, they're clearly not in our sphere of influence. I talk about that too in the book. Let's end the embargo, put the onus on them. But going back to Russia and Europe, Russia wants a sphere of influence. That's what this is all about. Yeah. You know, Georgia, don't you dare choose as a sovereign nation that you want to look toward Europe.
It's got legitimate concerns there,
no,
hasn't it?
He does not. Think of the energy he is using to plot and conspire against the freedom that the people of Eastern and Central Europe have gained in the last 20 plus years because of the fall of the Soviet Union. Russia could be a truly great country, not a bullying country, not totally dependent on oil and gas and using it to intimidate its neighbors, but he's made a different choice, and it's a regrettable choice for Russia.
Every country has vital interest, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And isn't the security of Ukraine of vital interest for Russia?
No, it is not. I mean, Ukraine is a customer for Gazprom. Ukraine has Russian ethnics, Russian speakers, so there are cultural connections. But Ukraine became an independent country. Of course, Russia can try to partner with Ukraine, but Russia should not feel that it can give orders to Ukraine, and if Ukraine doesn't abide by those orders, it can take aggressive action. That's not acceptable.
When you were running American foreign policy, you must have thought, what are America's vital interests here? And you must have thought about something else. Now, at the time the British were the imperial power in the world, someone like Palmerston could have given you a one-sentence definition of what the British Empire was about. What's America about in the world now?
Well, we're certainly not about an empire. We never have been about an empire. It's one of the very important differences that sets us apart. We do take military action, as you know, and then we go back home. But what we are about is promoting our values. Absolutely. I believe there should be a contest of values. If Russia believes, for example, its system is better than the West's, that Ukraine should not be part of the European Union, getting to make choices for itself, let the people of Ukraine hear both sides and then figure out what they want to do, not having it imposed. And I hope that what we can return to is that kind of debate about the future in the 21st century. And the United States will certainly be a vigorous proponent of what we believe and what we want to see happen.
How would you summarize what those vital interests and vital values are?
It starts with security, which is the number one issue for any government, and we need to protect our people and our friends and partners and allies around the world. Secondly, we have to promote global prosperity and a rules-based order that needs to be updated to fit the modern conditions in the global economy, to promote broad-based, inclusive prosperity. Thirdly, we want to promote and protect human rights. We think that's part of our DNA, our mission. And so when you look at our promotion of our values, our pursuit of our interests, and the protection of our security, we have to all the time try to figure out which is first, which is second, which is third in every situation.
You say in the book that there was a shift of emphasis in American foreign policy. You're less preoccupied with what Rumsfeld called the old Europe. You're less preoccupied with the transatlantic relations and alliances, and more preoccupied with things going on in Asia and other parts of the world. Does that mean that Europe's less important to you now than it used to be?
No, and I try to make very clear in the book that I thought we needed to renew and rebuild the important alliances that we have in Europe. I mean, Europe are our partners of first resort. This is where we really live. However, when I became Secretary of State, I quickly learned that Asia thought the Bush administration had totally neglected it. And we have vital interests there. We have defense treaties that we have promised to defend people. So it wasn't moving away from, it was pivoting toward without losing the importance, because I went to Asia in February, I went to Europe in March, and made that case from the very beginning.
And what about the boring old cliche about the special relationship? Is that worth anything nowadays?
It's worth everything to me and to our country. I'm a big Anglophile when it comes to special relationships, in part because I do think we see the world very similarly. I worked with two foreign secretaries, one Labor, one Tory. I had so much in common with both David Miliband and William Hague. We could talk about things in an easy, open fashion. Despite their political differences or differences even in our own country, there was this base of understanding that was so reassuring.
Do you think Britain's influence and utility to the United States would be enhanced or diminished by holding a referendum on whether to stay in the European Union?
Oh boy, you are asking me to cross into dangerous waters, which
You're
I
quite
will
clever
not
enough to deal with it.
No, I think that is a political decision at the very core of it. Europe needs Britain, in my opinion. I think Britain brings a perspective and an experience that is very important to Europe, especially post-economic crisis. So Britain will have to decide if they agree with that.
And what about whether Scotland is integral to Britain?
Oh, I would hate to have you lose Scotland. I got an honorary degree from St. Andrews, which I was
perfectly happy to interfere in British politics on the question of the Union. Why not on other matters?
Well, I would say I hope that doesn't happen. But again, I don't have a vote in Scotland, but I would hope it doesn't happen.
Why?
Well, because it just seems like
they're entitled to their freedom as much as Ukraine, aren't they?
But I think if there had been a real referendum, as opposed to a rump, intimidatory event.
Will there be a proper referendum?
There will be, because there had been legal process associated with it. And we'll see what the people of Scotland decide. But, I would think it would be a loss for both sides. But again, I don't have a vote.
Can I ask you about your personal ambitions? You say in the book you've not decided whether you're going to run for the presidency. Other factors are going to decide it for you. What are those other factors?
Well, they're very both personal and political. I mean, personally, I'm about to be a grandmother in the fall. I'm very excited about that. I want to relish the experience. I don't want to be sort of passing through it and looking forward. I want to be right in the middle of it. And a presidential campaign, if one decides to do it, is 24/7, all-consuming. I'm not ready for that. But the most important thing, as I say at the end of the book, is not the questions, will you run or can you win, but what's your vision for America and can you lead it there? I mean, we're going through one of our periodic political messes. Lots of dysfunction, lots of finger-pointing, inability to reach consensus and compromise. I want to be sure, as I evaluate this decision going forward, that I, number one, know where I want to lead the country, and number two, that I think I can make that happen.
You know that.
I don't.
You know what you can offer the country.
Oh, I know in general terms, but I haven't sat down and said, okay, exactly what's my economic policy? We're having a hard time creating jobs. What are we actually going to do about it? And how can I put together the political coalition, maybe from some unlikely partners, to achieve that? I haven't done any of that work. I've been very focused on, writing this book and talking about the foreign policy, national security issues.
Well, how would America have been different if you had beaten Obama to the White House?
I don't know. And
Well,
we
you
will
must
never
care.
know. We will never know, Jeremy.
Whether you know is not quite the same as whether you care, though, is it?
But I stopped caring. I mean, honestly, when I lost and he won, that was the end for me, and I ended up actually working for him.
You think that's good for America? It was good for America, was it?
Oh, yes, of course it was. Are you kidding? Absolutely. I mean, it was so fortunate for me after that hard, long, intense campaign that I got to support somebody with whom I had so much in common. Even though we had differences, we agreed on much more than we disagreed on. I don't ruminate. I'm not like sitting around thinking about, oh, what might have been. That's never been my thought process. So he won. I pledged my support. I helped him in every way that I could, and then he asked me to be Secretary of State, and it's kind of a very unusual path, but one that I've quite enjoyed.
We're roughly the same sort of age.
Oh, good.
We're both past
So
that,
you're so young.
Exactly. We're both past that great watermark, and I just wonder why on earth anybody would want to go back into the White House, given your experience of the torrid time you had last time you were there.
Well, we got a lot done. I'm very proud of what happened to the country, and I'm proud of what President Obama has done. I mean, if you take the 8 years of Bill Clinton, the 8 years of Barack Obama, and you compare it to the 8 years of Reagan, the 8 years of Bush, the country was so much better off with progressive, energetic, democratic presidents. The economy was stronger. Our fiscal house was much better ordered. We're starting to get health care, something you all take for granted. I mean, we did positive things for the American people in those years.
Intrusion into your personal life.
No, I mean, there's hardly anything left. It's going to make for pretty boring reading, I'm afraid, if it continues.
So that hasn't put you off.
No, it hasn't. In part because I have a pretty good idea that this is a contact sport, as we say. Politics in the United States at this moment in our history is very rough and tumble because there are big stakes, and people, unfortunately, sometimes engage in unsavory, negative name-calling and the like. That's part of it. I understand that. And if you're not tough enough to get into that arena, then truly you should not even put your toe in, because it's quite a gauntlet.
You can hit me for asking you this.
Oh, I may.
Do you think you'd ever have become Secretary of State had you not been Mrs. Clinton?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that question ended when I ran for the Senate. When I ran for the Senate, and I ran first against a very dominant figure, then Mayor Giuliani. Then I ran against a young congressman with a lot more money rushing into his campaign. The fact that the people of New York elected me ended that debate. I'm very grateful that I learned a lot, and I continue to learn from my husband's political acumen and decision making. I think what caused the President Obama, to ask me to be Secretary of State was actually that campaign. Because until you go through that sort of ordeal and you know how hard it is for the other person, you don't know what they're really made of. And the President told me, I watched you under the most difficult circumstances, and you're the person I want to represent our country while I'm dealing with the economic mess.
Yeah, I partially asked this question because there's a deficit of women at a very high level in politics, and I would be very interested to know your response to this, which is, do you think women at the highest levels of politics behave differently to men?
I think that many do. I'm not going to overgeneralize and say that all do. It's been my experience in working with women heads of state and heads of government that on issues affecting family life, children's well-being, women's opportunities, there is a much greater immediate recognition of the importance of those issues. Now, that again, I say is a generalization, not all fit into that category. But when I sit down and talk with the president of Brazil or the president of Chile or president of country in Asia, whether it be Benazir Bhutto before she was ousted and assassinated, or anyone else, the conversation about some of these social issues is very much embedded in the political discourse and an awareness of how hard a lot of the decision making is for families today in many parts of the world.
Hillary Clinton, thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy.